Welcome back, everybody, to the Marketing Rules podcast. It is a pleasure to be joined by Evan Kramer, CEO at MotionPoint. Evan, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Your morning, my afternoon. For those of us who aren't aware of you and your work, maybe you could kind of give us a brief introduction of yourself, a bit about your background, and a little bit also about kind of MotionPoint, though we will cover some of that as we carry on through the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. But that's kind of what I do as we support a lot of global website translation for brands all over the world. A little bit about myself, really a digital marketing veteran over the last 25 years, came up through digital marketing, through many different technology and internet startups and growth companies. Mostly venture-backed, working as a chief marketing officer for several brands, helping launch on an online automotive company, an online real estate company, home security business. So over the course of my career, have had a lot of those types of experiences and success selling companies in the selling a company to DirecTV, to an education technology company, a marketing technology company. And that has now landed me into MotionPoint as my third time as a CEO, with a couple successful ventures behind me. I joined MotionPoint in September of last year, and MotionPoint is really fits what I do a lot, because it's about, how do you get more out of marketing globally or through translated experiences? And what type of technology innovation do you need to support that? And so MotionPoint, what we do, we've been around for over 20 years. We are private equity backed company where we do website translation that is managed for you on a concierge platform. So where we really fit is where companies, especially marketing teams that don't have internal localization resources, want to provide a translated experience and need an enterprise solution. We provide that experience on our platform. We do continuous monitoring of the origin site content, and anytime content is updated, whether it's a blog, whether it's a homepage, whether it's an image, we're detecting it in real time. We're getting it translated the way that our client wants it translated, whether it's through a linguist or we're now using AI to begin to do that translation. So we can talk a little bit about how AI is disrupting and innovating in our category. But we do everything end to end, from the technology platform to the translation itself, and then all the professional services that come with it. So we support some of the top global brands in the world, and also a lot of the US-based companies that want to provide either a Spanish experience or a French-Canadian experience. So a little bit about myself and MotionPoint.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. It's translation is one of those kind of bugbears of the marketing industry, right? It's one of those things that we tend to kind of work with businesses when they're opening up into a new territory. And at some point you have that conversation. Do we need to translate the website? Do we need to have a separate website in that host language? How do we go about that? And it always, you just kind of, your brain starts to kind of whirl around, because you think, we've got this website, it's got God knows how many pages, it's got years and years of articles and blogs. I mean, it just sounds like an absolute nightmare trying to kind of translate that. So being able to offload that onto someone else is probably the kind of like and not using Google Translate, which is notoriously terrible, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times, I guess over the last 20 years, a lot of that has been managed by scope. So a client would say, I only have so much budget, so I can only translate so much of my website. Some of that website is where the core traffic may go for that particular website. And there's always a lot of complex decisions around website translation, because it's pretty simple and straightforward from a return on marketing investment if you are a transactional business, right? If you're an e-commerce company and you're translating, and the more you translate, the more sales you get. I mean, that's probably the most straightforward investment you can make in translation. But if you're a B2B company or an informational site, or a publisher, what is the return I'm going to get? And so I think a lot of that has been managed by scope over time, and understanding really where those benefits are. And one of the benefits of Motion Point is that because we're concierge, we can provide that experience without the internal investment it may take to get it done. And so you can understand what that return might be before you make that next level of investment.
And
Um,
and
go-
um and how is it you kind of go about it? Because there's kind of, I guess there's a couple of kind of lines of thought when kind of translating online content is if it's your website, do you have a completely separate website that's in German, that's .de or something like that, or do you have the .com kind of site and then you have your little kind of flags up in the corner? Do you detect it by IP address? What is
yeah,
it you're kind of, how is it you go about it, and what is it you see? Is there a preferred method? Is there a better method?
yeah. So there are really two ways at the end of the day to translate a website. One is through proxying the site, which is what we do, where we literally on a separate server will mirror the origin site. And we can, based on the client's recommendation on how they want the URL structure, whether they want it as a subdomain or a subdirectory, set up that structure. And so that we will have a mirrored site and those pages managed. The other way to do it is within your own CMS, where you can set up your own pages and bring in that content through an API or connector. Or you could proxy through the browser where you cache the translation in JavaScript. So there's really sort of two ways to go about setting up your website translation. The one on the one side, if you're using your CMS, if you're using sort of the client side experience, you've got to have resources to manage that front end framework. Whereas if you use a proxy, my team's resources can manage that framework. So if we're QAing it after we bring in simplified Chinese onto a Spanish origin site, the amount of characters and pixels are going to change and could break functionality. We would detect that. We would fix that. If that was within your own CMS experience, your own front end framework, you would have to have resources internally to manage that, or or it wouldn't get fixed.
I mean, you make a good point there, because that's one of the things that might be that some businesses just don't consider, that the kind of the change in characters is going to potentially change formatting.
Right.
What are the other things that businesses should probably need to take into consideration before they kind of go down this route around translation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, first of all, quality is the biggest area that you need to take into account. There's really three levels of quality of translation. There's good enough, and the good enough is really coming along with machine training. Back in 2016 when Google launched Google Translate, it really was the first neuromachine model that was used. And now with ChatGPT and OpenAI, you now have a large language model that can be used. And so that will get you part of the way there. And you can say, is that good enough? The second level is human translation using linguists. And then the third level is what we call in the industry transcreation. And what transcreation is taking it a bit further from literal translation and localizing it for that particular language experience. So making it sound and lingo in that particular language. So those are the three levels to think about. So quality is number one as terms of a dimension. Number two is speed. How quickly do you need it translated? We manage. You can probably figure out who those customers are, but some of the largest telecommunications companies in the world. And when there is an iPhone release, right, the day that iPhone release happens, we need to have everything translated. So the speed for that is very important. But if you are, writing an article and you may not necessarily need that translated for weeks or months, depending on when you get to it. So the when that is, and I think the biggest area to consider is the total cost of ownership. If you are going to make this investment, how much do you invest in this short term versus long term? And a lot of reasons why companies come to us is typically a managed outsource solution is about 20% the cost of doing it yourself. Now, doing it yourself, you have a lot of control. You build it into your workflows, you have systems, but you've got to hire dedicated resources and you've got to really build that acumen internally. So, sort of cost of ownership is a big factor. So, speed, quality, cost of ownership, those are a lot of the dimensions. The other factor that's sort of evolved over time is the complexity of your front end framework. There's a lot of large enterprise customers that have built their own CMS from homegrown. Some of them are using out of the box enterprise CMSs like Sitecore. And then you've got companies on, the WordPresses and Drupals of the world. So it also depends on the type of front end framework you're using and how that works and plays with translation.
Um, and you kind of touched on this slightly at the start. Is kind of what's the data around the reasons kind of to translate? With regards to kind of your marketing activity, your sales activity, your return.
Yeah. All the research that we have and validated through our customers is, I believe it's about 70%, maybe a little bit higher, of of people in the world that prefer to have language in their first language experience, right? So if you are a Spanish speaking person, that over 70% of those want a Spanish experience, no matter where you live in the world. And so really trying to understand, who are your demographics, who are your customer segments, and kind of go from there.
Mhm.
So the biggest reason to translate is that, there isn't, unlike, the euro, which has become, or Bitcoin, which is now becoming more of a universal currency. We don't yet at the point where we have a universal language. And so that is truly an important factor here.
Yeah. That all kind of makes sense. And what about kind of offsite? What about things like kind of social media and advertising and things like that? Is
Yeah.
that an area that kind of Motion Point gets involved with? And what are the how does that work? Is that again advantageous? Is it more is it too much trouble? What's the kind of the data around that?
Yeah, I think it's all web content. So the website is definitely one of the more complex. I would say after that, you've got video and images that can be complex depending on how the content is embedded, whether it's subtitles or dubbing for video, whether the images have embedded text or whether they're not embedded text. When you get to social media, I think that it depends on the strategy of the marketing team. A lot of times there might be where you want a some particular comment or post to stand out, or the response to that post to stand out. So there's selective about what gets translated. Email is pretty straightforward. We do a lot of email marketing where, whether it's operational emails or marketing campaign emails, either getting the template translated or just connecting a feed to get the text translated itself. And then I think two other areas that you mentioned. One is the digital advertising side. That is probably a little bit more straightforward as well, because it's more planned, right? Usually advertising isn't as real time. So you're spending time developing copy, getting that copy translated. So there's not at this point sort of a real time need in a lot of areas for that digital advertising. But where there is a lot of real time need is in the customer support side of the
Mhm.
business. So when you think about, or even sales with online chat is now being integrated into things like Salesforce, where you can, instead of having multilingual customer service or sales reps on the one side, you can have the translation coming in and doing an asynchronous flow of translation back and forth between two non-native speaking folks. So so across the omnichannel spectrum is really where we focus, and
Yeah.
all of those can be really well supported. Like I said, website translation, the most vast and complex. and then images and video probably next.
Do you get much involved in kind of like real-time voice kind of translation, like kind of universal kind of translators? Because that's another thing that we kind of see kind of pop up on the radar and have conversations about on
Yeah,
occasion.
we don't get as involved in that. When we work with video, we're doing more subtitling. There are a lot of companies that specialize, especially in the entertainment industry, in the voiceover. There was a big announcement. I believe it was. I don't know if it was late last year or very early this year, where YouTube is supporting multilingual through a lot of their tool set, and so the supply of translation in the YouTube channel, which is the largest video channel in the world, is really growing. So the ability to do dubbing and subtitling in YouTube. So you're going to see a lot more and more YouTube videos, TikTok videos really become translated and be able to select the language that you want it in.
And with that kind of off-site kind of translation through social advertising, whatever that is, I guess the stats and the data points towards that you're going to get higher engagement rates, higher open rates if it's in that kind of if it's in that local language, right?
Yeah. Especially on a website, one of the big things as you know, as a marketer for websites is engagement, right? And so the bounce rate is very critical, and we talk about attention span, and the it's directly inversely correlated to time, right? So as time goes on, in 2024 next year, I would bet the average attention span declines further for individuals. And so, as a marketer, you need to do everything you can to capture that attention very quickly. And so, if you have a flicker on your screen, or if the page isn't loading, or if it's not translating your preferred language, or the quality isn't very good, you're going to lose that opportunity. And you spend a lot of time to get eyeballs to where you want it to be. You need to make sure those eyeballs engage in what you're presenting.
And you touched on this just at the start on AI and how that is kind of changing or is making inroads into the translation space. Um, talk to us a little bit about how that is is it competition? Do you work alongside it? How does it work now in translation?
So the biggest disruption in our industry, I mean, it's disrupting or innovating on a lot of different spectrums, right? So you talk about website, or you can talk about audio, you can talk about video. So let's stick with the content format within websites. The biggest sort of innovation happening with AI is the ability to no longer have to rely on sending content directly to a linguist to get human quality translation. And so if you were to take, let's say, 3 chapters of text and send them through AI, send them through neural machine training, you can get a certain level of quality across those 3 chapters of text. And now where the industry is trying to understand, how do we measure that quality so that we can provide signals and feedback to the customer or client so that they can make a decision. Is that good enough for
Hmm.
my customer? Or do I want to send it to post editing to a human linguist to improve the quality? And so what that does is it creates more empowerment on the workflow, but it also reduces the cost of translation, because now you don't have to send everything to a linguist to get human quality. You try to send as much through technology as you possibly can. And then probably that last mile, you now translate. Now, on the one hand, it makes, from a revenue standpoint, if you think about a business side of it, the revenue I generate per word, let's say, is going to go down, but the amount of volume of scope will increase, because now the customer can afford translating more, where maybe they didn't translate their blogs previously, now can translate blogs. So there's kind of a balance between the two. So I do think that quality estimation is a big area. And then I think the next frontier on the content side is really going to be on that transcript, the amount of localization needed to optimize the experience. So just because you have translation literal, and I like to use the example of a Chevy Nova, right? And in Chevy Nova, Nova in Spanish is Nova, don't go, right? And
Mhm.
so how do you sell a car that doesn't go, right? So the literal translation in a lot of languages needs to be localized, and so using AI to identify, hey, is this good enough for that localized experience, and also is this good enough for search engine optimization? And so kind of being able to identify those areas. So on a text world, I think it's more of innovation that's driving. Whereas I do think in the audio and visual space, it is much more disruptive because where you might have to use talent to do a voiceover, you can now use AI generated voice or AI generated, people, or avatars to
Mhm.
do things. And so you don't need an actual human translator on the other end of the phone when you can have sort of an AI bot doing it. So I think on that side of the fence on translation, I'd be a lot more worried about the disruption. But on the content side, it's really about quality and estimating quality.
I know as a marketeer, quality always kind of appeals. I'm mortified if in English we see something that's kind of incorrectly spelled or grammatically incorrect. Why you would want to then translate something and that you just get the same result, but in Spanish or in Mandarin or something else, right? I mean, you'd be absolutely mortified. This has been absolutely fascinating, Evan. It's an area that I don't think kind of gets enough coverage within the kind of marketing space, and I'm sure a lot of the audience will want to know more. So as always, we'll include all of your details in the show notes. If anybody wants to kind of get in contact or know more about you and your business, then they can. But Evan Kramer, for now, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.